I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My delegation aligns itself with the statements delivered by the G77 and China and the OIC. We would like to thank the Secretary General, OHCHR, and Special Procedures for presenting their reports in the committee to enrich our deliberations. The third committee gathers this year at a time when the promise of human rights enshrined in the Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights conventions, and international law is increasingly under strain. Despite progress, the global human rights situation remains dire and demands our urgent attention. Across continents, millions continue to suffer from violence, foreign occupation, discrimination, and systemic injustices. Conflicts, old and new, deprive communities of their fundamental freedoms, while inequalities, poverty, and the denial of economic, social, and cultural rights continue to fuel instability and despair. At the very foundation of the international human rights architecture lies the right of peoples to self-determination. This principle, enshrined in the Charter, reaffirmed in the human rights covenants, and recognized in numerous resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council, is the basic right upon which the enjoyment of all other rights depends. Yet, decades after its universal acceptance, millions remain deprived of this right. The people of Palestine have for generations faced dispossession, blockade, and the use of excessive force, all in clear violation of international law. Today, the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza has exposed the costs of denial of the right to self-determination. The international community must act decisively to end these atrocities, ensure accountability, and deliver on the long-denied promise of an independent, viable, and contiguous state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds, Al-Sharif as its capital. Madam Chair, the plight of the Kashmiri people is also emblematic of this tragic story. For over 7 decades, and especially since India's unilateral and illegal measures of August 2019, Kashmiris continue to live under repression, denied freedoms, and subjected to arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, demographic engineering, and sexual violence against women. Just like the Palestinians, the Kashmiri people also await the fulfillment of UN resolutions that guaranteed their right to self-determination. We urge the United Nations, in particular the Security Council, to uphold its own commitments to ensure accountability for ongoing violations and to enable the Kashmiri people to determine their destiny through a free and impartial plebiscite under the auspices of the United Nations. If the international community fails to uphold its commitments to the people of Palestine and Kashmir, the credibility of the human rights system will remain gravely undermined. Madam Chair, another grave threat to human rights is the alarming rise of Islamophobia. Across various regions, Muslims face hate speech, discrimination, stigmatization of their beliefs, and attacks on their places of worship. Islamophobia has become institutionalized in some societies, fueling division and exclusion. At the initiative of OIC led by Pakistan, the General Assembly designated 15th March as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, and the Secretary General has lately appointed his Special Envoy of Islamophobia. These are important milestones. We call for the adoption of an action plan by the UN to counter the scourge of Islamophobia. Equally corrosive is the deliberate spread of disinformation. It is no longer a passive distortion. It is, in fact, a weapon deployed to deflect scrutiny from grave violations, malign communities, and delegitimize their just struggles. If unchecked, it will undermine trust, divide societies, and silence the victims. Pakistan recognized this danger early on and led the adoption of the landmark consensus resolution on countering disinformation for the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms by the General Assembly in 2021. This landmark resolution provides a framework to address this menace while safeguarding freedom of expression. We urge all member states to join us in operationalizing its vision to ensure that truth, not fake news and propaganda, guides our collective response to human rights challenges. Madam Chair, the indivisibility of human rights requires that we address with equal urgency the economic, social, and cultural rights of peoples. The long-standing imbalance in global focus with a disproportionate emphasis on civil and political rights is unjust and unsustainable. The right to education, health, housing, decent work, and an adequate standard of living are no less fundamental. Poverty, hunger, and exclusion are not only violations of rights in themselves, they are also the root cause of instability and conflict. The right to development must be reaffirmed as universal and inalienable. Only through a just international economic order can all peoples enjoy their human rights. For developing countries, the neglect of economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to development, makes it harder to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, to combat climate shocks, and build inclusive societies. Madam Chair, to translate the vision of human rights for all and to leave no one behind, we must first ensure that human rights conventions and resolutions are implemented both in letter and spirit, and there be no impunity for any violations. Second, economic, social, and cultural rights must be brought to the center of our global agenda with special attention to the needs of developing countries. Third, the protection of civilians, especially women and children in occupied territories and conflict-affected areas, must be prioritized, and perpetrators of war crimes must be held accountable. Fourth, digital technologies must be governed in a manner that bridges divides rather than deepens them, ensuring that Global Digital Compact is a tool for inclusion and protection of rights. Fifth, we must intensify international efforts to combat disinformation, hate speech, racism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia through legal, educational, and awareness-raising measures. And finally, the right to development must be reaffirmed as a universal and inalienable right. We must work towards creating an international environment that enables equitable and sustainable development for all. This includes addressing structural inequalities in the global economy and reforming international financial institutions that benefit developing countries. Madam Chair, the challenges before us are immense, but the opportunities are equally great. It is our collective responsibility to seize them and transform the human rights landscape for our common good. We can do that by enhancing international cooperation and reaffirming the Charter's promise that all peoples everywhere shall live in freedom, dignity, and equality. I thank you.